as I speak, I may or may not, I'm not sure, address some of the issues that have risen from a perspective of a presumably Latin American perspective. I am personally Venezuelan, but I will try to have my multilateral hat on as we go along. A very brief word on CAF. I don't want to take up too much of your time. There's a fact sheet that has been distributed. But as Ambassador Davido mentioned at the beginning, the origins of CAF, although Andean, that's where CAF comes from, Corporación Andina de Fomento, is now really a Latin American development bank. And we call it Development Bank of Latin America, Banco de Desarrollo de América Latina, with the preposition signifying the fact that the bank belongs to Latin America as opposed to other multilateral organizations that have donors and debtors. And in this case, we're all donors and debtors. We're 18 member countries, 16 Latin American, plus the 2 Iberian Peninsula countries with which Latin America is very close, Spain and Portugal, of course. Our mission is to promote integration and sustainable development in Latin America, and we have been promoting this now for 41 years from our headquarters, which are based in Caracas, Venezuela. We provide a multiplicity of financial and non-financial services, both to the public and private sectors. We're currently about $20 billion in assets. About $15 billion of those assets are in the loan portfolio, and about $6 billion of shareholders' equity currently, or by the end of this year. We are approving approximately $10 to $11 billion per year in the region, which is an amount, if not equal to, analogous to that which is being approved by the IDB and the World Bank. So we're getting to the point, not right now, but in the next couple of years, will be Latin America development financing will be coming more or less a third, and a third from each of these 3 development organizations. That's the outlook, at least from our perspective at this point in time. We obtain our financing both from the capital of our shareholders, the countries, about 35% of our total financing comes from a strong capital base, but mostly from access to international capital markets, where we participate both in the long-term bond markets and the short-term commercial paper markets, both in the US, Europe, and Asia, throughout the world, in fact. Our portfolio is concentrated approximately 55% in infrastructure development. That's CAF's strength. Although our participation, what we call social development, is increasing, and is currently around 20% of the total. About 15% of our total investments or loan portfolio are based in the productive sectors, including the financial sector and the private sector. About 25% of our total portfolio is non-sovereign, that is basically private. We have a strong complementary agenda to our financial services, which includes our participation in this event. CAF feels that its broad development agenda includes not only financing services, but a series of other investigations, research, and promotion of public policies in social, environmental, competitiveness issues, public policies for development, and including relations with the rest of the world, of Latin America for the rest of the world. We are 41 years old, as I said earlier, and going strong under the leadership of Mr. Enrique Berrizbeitia, who's been heading the organization in a not very democratic way for the past 20 years, and has recently been re-elected for his 5th period for the next 5 years. I'll now turn to my comments on the China-Latin American issues. And I think a point was recently made that Latin America, China is one country, very big country, but Latin America is many countries. We have 16 Latin American member countries, and I think if you include the Caribbean, I can't remember, 34 or so countries in Latin America. But say about 10 countries in South America, and say 6 or 7 in Central America, plus Cuba and the Dominican Republic. These are the Latin American countries, excluding the English or non-Spanish speaking Caribbean countries. Obviously, China's presence in Latin America is evolving, and we've heard Dr. Wan and Dr. Yang speaking of new stages in the development of that relationship in trade and development and investment, and we certainly look forward to those changes. I will make some commentaries that are not intended to be critical, but realistic as to how we view the relationship between Latin America and China from CAP's perspective. Whether it has a soul or not, the Chinese presence in Latin America, I think it's a question of a matter of discussion. But I would say that certainly not the Chinese presence in Latin America is certainly not similar to what happened in the past, in the history, which led to such pejorative terms such as banana republics. I think we're in a different stage of worldwide relations that I don't believe that the Chinese presence in Latin America is how to say, oppressive. It behooves Latin American countries also to develop an intelligent relationship with China to make sure it's as balanced as possible. That said, I'd like to talk about briefly trade issues, investment issues, and possibly monetary issues, which have not been discussed today. As we know, and we just heard Dr. Yang, I will not repeat it, we have a very strong and growing trade relationship with China, almost $200 billion last year, probably larger this year, I don't know. And it's fairly well balanced. That is, it's about 90 billion in each way. Exports and imports are more or less balanced from and to China and Latin America. And China, as Ambassador Davido said earlier, represents an increasing proportion of Latin America's trade flows, especially the South American. The principal exporters are Brazil, Chile, Argentina, Peru, and in Central or North America, Mexico, to a lesser extent. And exports now to China from Latin America, depending on the country, last year represented somewhere between 13 and 16% of the total of these principal countries, with the exception of Brazil. So although the trade is relatively well balanced in terms of exports and imports to and from China and Latin America, it is very different and very complementary in nature and very disbalanced in that respect. China exports generally very high value-added products. Latin America, as we have seen, exports its comparative advantages, which are raw materials and commodities, as it has almost always done. And in fact, this trade in the last 5 to 10 years, basically the last 5 years, has certainly contributed very significantly to the fact that Latin America's economies have been very resilient to the international financial crisis that we have been living through since at least 2008, and which is not yet finished, as we can see. So it has been very favorable in that respect, as well as the fact that Latin America has improved in general, not all countries, but in general has improved its macroeconomic stance, and therefore the combination of this strong external sector led by world demand, but basically Chinese and Asian demand for raw materials, together with a stronger macroeconomic stance of Latin American countries in general, has allowed the Latin American economies to be much more resilient in the face of this international crisis, in which we have very little responsibility, I'm glad to say, because we've had some responsibility in the past for some of those. There are also some downsides, obviously, from this relationship. There are many I think the overall relationship with China and Latin America is very positive, as I've just said, but there are some things we have to be aware of. And this has been mentioned before. From Latin America's perspective, some manufacturing sectors and countries have felt a negative impact from the increased Chinese competition and presence. Textiles, telecommunications, electronics, especially Central America and to a lesser extent also Mexico, have been affected by the Chinese presence in Latin America, but also in South America to a lesser extent, and these things have been mentioned, by the fact that Chinese manufacturing is probably more efficient, more cost-effective than many Latin American countries, including the larger ones. And it has affected some of these sectors, and we have to see how to deal with that in a long-term basis. But I think more important than this short-term type of implications are the risks for Latin America to deepen its historical dependence on commodity exports. We have lived through this. This is the history of Latin America, dependency of commodity exports, of course. And that makes our economies vulnerable to the ups and downs of the global commodity prices and global commodity demand, and to potential cycles, in this case, even in the Chinese economy, which I think are inevitably to be expected in the future. Although China has an impressive 30-year track record of 9–10% growth, and really it's admirable that how this has been achieved. As an economist, you know, all countries go through cycles, so we are likely to see cycles in the future that may not be so favorable, and therefore this excessive dependence, this excessive, what we say in Spanish, reprimarización, to return to primary sectors of the economy, to emphasize them, can be a source of external vulnerability. As I said, Latin America's growth in the first decade of this century has been, to a great extent, very favorable, thanks to the external sector, as well as to the macro policies. But there is this vulnerability to concentrate in low value-added primary sector, entails risks of even deindustrialization in some cases. As I said, it behooves Latin American countries. It's not China's responsibility to tell us what to do or to it is our responsibility to take advantage of the relationship with China and Asia in a very positive way, and to make the adjustments necessary so that we don't increase these external risks through prudent fiscal monetary policies, through prudent policies that aim at economic transformation of our economies, and through partnerships with China and with other countries in the world, with the United States, with European countries, with India, to promote investments that will lead to a productive transformation in Latin America, in which we add value to our comparative advantages. The idea for Latin America is not to continue forever and ever exporting copper or aluminum or soya, but maybe produce the products that soya consumers use in China more directly and export more finished products, with or without Chinese investment in the region. So we are aware of all these risks, and certainly CAF is aware of them, and in our view of, our comprehensive view of the development process, we are promoting very substantially the productive transformation of our region. And this brings me to the second topic, which is the investment issue, and there is obviously an important complementarity between Latin America's need for productive transportation of our economies to insert ourselves more competitively into the world economy, into the production structures of the world economy, to add value to our comparative advantages, etc. And China has obviously very large financial savings, as well as an increasing demand both for commodities and for consumer goods as its population, as its economy evolves into a more urban population and increases its consumer demand. The point is that China can use and is using some of its very substantial financial savings to invest directly in many economies in the world, and as well as in Latin America. And what we are seeing is that what we will be working for in the future, I think, from Latin America's perspective, both from individual countries' perspectives as well as from organizations such as CAF, is to promote partnerships so that these investments not only go to ensuring commodity supplies for China, but also go to adding value to these commodity supplies, to improving manufacturing exports, to inserting Latin America's economies into the globalized production schemes, of which China is a very important player today. This foreign direct investment potential for China and Latin America is also not only related to bilateral trade between China and Latin America, but Latin America is unquestionably placed in a, how would I say it, I don't know if it's strategic, but at least in the middle between the Pacific and the Atlantic. So it is in a geographic location that can be very useful for even Chinese investments to penetrate other markets of the world, especially the United States and European markets, to the degree that there are mutual benefits to be had from such investments. So I think we need to be very conscious of this. I think China needs to be conscious of it, and what I've heard today indicates that China is looking forward to an improved and qualitatively different relationship with Latin America, both in trade and investment, and we welcome that. And I think CAF is well placed to play a role in that respect. We do have very good relations with the Chinese Development Bank in particular, with which we have had co-financing projects in Latin America, and we have even had lines of credit from the Chinese Development Bank. But there's a lot more that can be done to develop these complementarities between the Chinese needs and potentials and Latin America's needs and potential. I should say that the world is changing geoeconomically and certainly geopolitically. The shift, the center of gravity has shifted, if you say, from the Atlantic to the Pacific region, from west to east. How far east or west will depend on how things evolve in the future. But the fact that we're talking about China, when I first got to CAF 15 years ago, we didn't even mention China. 10 years ago, we didn't even mention China. But for the last 5 or 7 years, China is present in every discussion that we have international. I think the third topic that has not been mentioned, and I'd like to briefly touch upon it, is a monetary issue. I'm referring in particular to the increasing internationalization of the renminbi, or the yuan, which is currently in process, and we welcome that internationalization. We would hope it takes place in a similarly dynamic manner as trade has evolved with China. As we all know, the financial and debt issues, the financial crisis currently affecting the industrial economies has led to an appreciation of Latin America's currencies. In general, this has been the case, and I think in general, the appreciation of Latin America's currencies has been greater than probably any other currency in the world. As I say, I'm talking in general basis, I don't have the specifics. Brazil, in particular, the Brazilian real is the currency that I understand has mostly appreciated in the world as a result of this financial crisis. And of course, this has led to also to a relative appreciation of Latin American currencies vis-a-vis the renminbi. While I recognize that China has allowed its currency to appreciate in the last few years, both nominally and in real terms as inflation in China has increased, the renminbi has not really appreciated as much as Latin America, and of course this reinforces the vulnerabilities I was talking about earlier, the vulnerabilities regarding trade and investment, because it has disadvantages for Latin America's economies and may even lead to some of these protectionist measures that Dr. Yang mentioned earlier. So this is something that should be addressed, and Latin America, I think, is looking forward to an increasingly convertible and accessible renminbi with a view to serving as a complementary reserve currency for Latin America and other countries, to contribute to correcting the significant macroeconomic disbalances that exist on a global basis, and which have led to a certain extent to the current crisis. to promote an increase in foreign direct investment in Latin America from Chinese sources with a qualitative improvement over the long term, as I mentioned earlier, and to help also develop an important consumer market for Latin American products in China. 1.3 billion people in China is a big market, and we would like to have some access to that. Obviously, some Latin American businessmen are beginning to do this, and I think this will increase as mutual knowledge improves over time, and knowledge of both sides of the Pacific. I think much progress is being done in all of these fronts, but I think the upshot is that there is a great degree of economic complementarity between China and Asia in a broader sense and Latin America that has to be developed in an intelligent manner, that there is an enormous amount of potential for putting into practice this complementarity in a pragmatic way. And we are certainly, CAF, in a position to try to contribute to the development of these mutually beneficial advantages. Thank you very much.